Okay, so here we go. This is week 2, context and environment. Good quote here. One design that fits everyone fits no one. This kind of fits as to what we're talking about this week around design. The way medical equipment is designed, and really everything is designed in terms of how it applies to the individuals who are disabled. A lot of this stuff definitely be questions on here on the midterm exam and the lecture questions, but a lot of stuff applies to your assistive technology assignment. These concepts of design or redesign, you need to think about them. If you look at the example of the leg lifter that the students designed a couple of years ago, it was particularly tailored to their client. He liked the Red Sox coloring, fit his truck, the way it looped around. It was unique and designed for him. Kind of get into that kind of theme this week. Kind of going back to last week, some key things from last week. The history of the disabled is a history of discrimination, abuse, extermination, marginalization, isolation. Parts of that thinking still exist today within parts of the medical model and other kinds of thinking. We did the example of the designer babies as an example of that. And kind of as therapists, what's kind of the take-home message? We really need to kind of see beyond the stereotypes, see people as individuals with complex, unique needs versus just statistics on that norm assessment. You know, we talked about the Peabody as an example, the fine motor skills. They're below where their average person is. Thinking of the whole person as their needs and whatever it is versus numbers on a bell curve kind of thing. Here's our questions for today. Again, selected questions of this will be these exact questions. Some of these will be on the midterm exam. So you need to know the answers to all these questions. Question 8 is something you just have to kind of put together. I'm not going to really answer it. You have to kind of figure out how you would answer that. But these first 7, you'll have the answers to all these in the PowerPoint in the lecture that I'm giving. Watch this video. It's a cool video about this woman and how she Izzy Wheels, how she designed these wheelchairs, made a business out of it. Gets at this theme of making it unique, and redesigning, kind of rethinking how somebody thinks or looks in a wheelchair. You see someone in a wheelchair, you kind of instantly stigmatize them, and you kind of wonder what happened to you, kind of thinking, versus seeing a redesigned wheelchair like, oh, that's pretty cool, that's pretty neat. It's more of an appeal kind of thing versus a stigma kind of thing. Same with this, with the disability and design, with Mindy Scherer, her story about her son, how she is a designer, and she got into the idea of designing nice looking clothes for the disabled. So they're easy to take on and off. You use magnets, all kinds of different ideas. May give you some ideas if you're thinking of doing clothes as your assistive tech kind of thing. She made them stylish, so again, we're getting away from that stigma. And she talked about how much, for a lot of us, clothes are a big part of who you are. They're kind of an expression of who you are. This term enclothed cognition is this idea of how you look is kind of matched to how you think, how you see the world. She talked about her son. He had a disability, and he always wanted to wear jeans, but he couldn't because they would not. You couldn't get him down and up and down, when he went to the bathroom and that sort of thing. And she redesigned him. So it kind of really gets you into that mindset. It's a really, really cool video, quite short. Definitely watch it. Okay, so disability and adaptive design. Most stuff, the way it is now for folks who have disabilities, it's kind of medical focus. If you think about the adaptive design, it's very generic. Think about these clothes for folks living maybe in a nursing home. So it's easier, to access their peri area and all that sort of stuff and to dress them. Cost effective, can be very stigmatizing. Group stereotyping, it's very noticeable. Kind of screams there's something wrong with you medically. Very standardized. And the cost. In one sense, it's cost effective if it's uniform. They kind of mass produce. In terms of the cost to the person paying for it, usually it's quite inflated. I know when I was working in home health and I'm trying to get simple adaptive devices for a client, and look at the cost in a medical catalog, and it'd be like way too much money. Like for a button hook, like $20, $30. And as we'll see when we do it in our Maker Lab, you can make that for less than $1 from a paper clip and a dried up magic marker. So the cost is very inflated because it's a very controlled market. It's not very open to get certain things. Like in this area, say you want to get wheelchair medical accessories, usually there's 2 or 3 places that offer it. And you need a doctor's prescription, and the price is usually very inflated. Versus kind of redesigning things, it affects the cost, affects the appeal, affects the stigmatization, will reduce the stigma. Kind of redesigning or unbranding is the uncoupling of a device from its body-focused impairment. So this redesigning, again, this is what you're thinking about with your assistive technology device, emphasizes beauty, use, wide appeal. It's very individualized, human fit, consumer driven versus kind of closed market, medical driven. Here's some examples. Glasses. I know glasses, especially like when I was young, I think there's still to a degree, it's kind of a stigma when you're like you're 12, 13, your eyes change and oh, you need to have glasses. And it's like, oh, I have to wear glasses. But now it's almost like a cool thing to wear glasses. I know some people wear fake glasses just for the looks of it. And there's just so many different choices with glasses to match outfits, to match whatever. And the price correspondingly is just dropped. There's so much competition. They can't charge these inflated prices for glasses. And they're a lot cheaper, a lot more variety, a lot more appealing. Braces. Braces, it's still not a great thing to have braces. Fun thing to have great braces, but it's a lot more appealing. I know my son, he had braces for a while, and his friend wanted the braces. He didn't need the braces, but he wanted them because he loved the colors that they have now and all the different options. Medical tape or kinesio tape. It's a cool thing to get this tape on, whereas before it was like, oh, there's something wrong with you. What's wrong with your knee? And I was like, oh, look at that cool tape. Matches his outfit, is designable. You think of Apple, all the stuff they do, with Steve Jobs, all the design of the slick Apple computer, the iPhone, has that wide appeal to it. It's not stigmatizing and limiting. Cars are that way. They're a great example of wide appeal, design, all these kind of characteristics that make things more appealing, more market-driven kind of stuff. Again, it's kind of more person-focused, kind of moving from segregation to mainstream, moving from rigid standardization to interchangeable, more options, from noticeable, unattractive to humane and attractive. Emphasizes fit, comfort, use, and positive, individualized identification. Great example here with the prosthetic. These are not the kind of prosthetics you're going to be seeing, in the hospitals and rehab over the summer. But this is redesigning it. So it fits our outfit. It's a cool thing. It's an appealing thing. It's like, wow, look at that, versus, ooh, what's wrong with you? You're one of those people that lost your leg. How did you lose your leg? Kind of thing. Thinking. These are just some examples. There's nothing wrong with this helmet, especially if you need to use it, to wear it. If you're having seizures or whatever, and it protects your brain. But you think of the style, the redesign, this compared to this. These are helmets also. Cheerleading, I don't know if you're into cheerleading, but a lot of injuries around cheerleading. We had a student coming through here, a lot of head trauma, problems with concussions, from falls with cheerleading. It's very, very dangerous sport in terms of the injuries. Usually they're falling onto hard floors, doing all these incredibly challenging acrobatics and dance moves. It's very competitive now. They should be wearing helmets. But you think of the cheering, you think of the aesthetics of it. This obviously isn't going to work in cheering, but this may. These are helmets. They do protect them. They look just like a head sweatband, but they protect their skulls. They're a form of helmets. So it's kind of moving from this to this kind of thinking and design. The standard wheelchair that's very stigmatizing versus these cool chairs are like, wow, appeal. That's a neat thing. Not so much what's wrong with you, but that's appealing kind of thing. Different kinds of prosthetics are individualized to your style, to your tastes compared to the medical ones, the DME kind of ones. There's some canes that match our outfit versus the traditional cane. Kind of redesigning our thinking on how we do stuff, make stuff. There's some other examples. This is a neck brace, believe it or not, a back brace, a splint, versus most of the splints we make are very white, medical, kind of ugly looking. This is the opposite. It almost has a certain attractive appeal to it. It's a cane, looks like bones. This is kind of a walker or a cane of sorts. Turns into a knitting basket or a table. There's a redesigned bathroom. Doesn't look so awful medical kind of stuff, but it's accessible. Accessible shower, accessible toilet, the bars, all that. Okay, so we're going to shift to the ADA, the Americans with Disability Act, Disability Unemployment, and the ADA. This is a key legislation. You need to know about this for the exams in this class. It interrelates to other classes, the ergonomics class, the work class you take in the fall, and there's a good chance you're going to have board questions on this. Something we have to kind of be experts on and know very well as OTs as it relates to a lot of our clients and the issues they're dealing with. The ADA kind of evolved out of the Rehab Act of the 1970s, and if you watch Crip Camp, it's very much about the people that made this happen. The disabled community, the disabled movement that made this happen. It's like this common myth that it was just something that Congress decided to do. Not really. It was something that Congress was forced to do through that movement of the disabled community back in the 70s. It led to that Rehab Act, and then it led to the ADA 1990, and then the ADA was reformed again, I think, in 2007. The Rehab Act gave civil rights protection to disabled when the federal government was involved. Government funding transportation, housing, education, employment had to be accessible to members of the disabled community. Prior to that law, they really had no protection. And then the ADA took it one step further, extended those same rights to the private sector. So really all private sector businesses, there are definitely limitations to that. We'll talk about that. But they ideally were supposed to be have everything accessible to the disabled as well. The primary goal of the ADA was kind of to eliminate the financial bell curve for the disabled. What do I mean by the financial bell curve? So it's the difference in unemployment rates, as we'll look at it in a second, between the disabled and the able-bodied, how much money, salaries the disabled and able-bodied make, housing, education, all there's this huge gap, as you would suspect, between the disabled and the mainstream society around all these different issues around education, employment, finances. And the idea with this was to kind of flatten it out. So there isn't a curve. It isn't like the disabled are marginalized. Everybody is doing well. Everybody has an equal opportunity, to pursue the American dream and all that sort of stuff. To end discrimination against individuals and disabilities and to bring persons with disabilities into the economic and social mainstream. That's kind of what I mean by eliminating that bell curve of American life. That was the big ultimate goal of the ADA, to give everybody that equal chance, opportunity of attaining the American dream, financial, the house, education, those sorts of things. Key definitions within this ADA. In order to work, you, the disabled, must be physically able to perform what's called the essential functions of the job. The key characteristics you need to do the job. Some parts of the job may be not as essential as others, usually just like a job description. This is what you really need to do this job. You must be able to perform this job with reasonable accommodations. Most accommodations are really, really low cost and quite easily done. A lot of them need to already be incorporated within the ADA, but within a particular job, you have to have these reasonable accommodations. This accommodation for the employer to do these essential tasks can't create an undue hardship on the employer. This is where a lot of legal battles end up. Businesses, we can't do it because it's too much of a burden and it's going to sink us financially. A lot of times it ends up in court. So it's the whole idea of this language around undue hardship. The employer must focus on what the employee can do versus how or she does it. If you do it from the wheelchair, as long as you can do it, it's fine. Essential functions, what is that? Are based on the employer's judgment and the following. Job description, as we talked about, the amount of time performing each task, consequences of not performing a particular task, work experience of the applicant, collective bargaining if there's a union description. This is what we need to know. It's very important as an OT that we know this, because we'll have clients and they'll think, I want to go back to work and do such and such. And to look at that job and say, oh, through adapting, which is what we do as OTs, you can do the essential functions of this job. It is possible. No, it will not be an undue hardship on the employer. It is possible under ADA for you to be a teacher again, or a lawyer again, or whatever it is that you want to be able to do. Kind of up to us with the client to kind of figure this sort of stuff out. Undue hardship. This is kind of really gets into the trouble kind of thing. Is determined by the nature and cost of hiring the disabled in light of adaptations, tax credit, outside funding sources. It may cost more to hire or train the person. It may or may not. Usually it doesn't, but it may. And of course the adaptations. But the plus side is to that, all these, there's tax credits, there's outside funding sources that you're going to get as a result of hiring more disabled. Financial, a lot of it's determined also by the financial resources and overall size of the facility. So a small company putting in an elevator is going to be too much versus a huge kind of structure building company. Composition, structure, functions of the workforce, impact of accommodation of employees' ability to conduct business, so it can really impact their business. ADA eligibility criteria is based on medical embodied history of impairment. This is where a lot of the controversies come. These, you may recognize this from the CRIP camp. This is when a lot of disabled were doing these movements to get the Rehab Act and the ADA. But getting back to the ADA, as it was passed and how it's written, if your disability is more apparent and obvious, you're more likely to fit under the ADA. If you're paralyzed, if you're blind. But if it's something that's less visible, say chronic fatigue syndrome or chemical insensitivity or other less visible disabilities, it doesn't fit so snugly. You're not so easily covered under this law. A lot of gaps in that kind of coverage thing. It gets into gray areas as well. Some of the positives, let's kind of look at ADA critically. Passed in 1990, revised in 2007, 2021. So we're talking 14 years. Kind of where has it gone in those 14 years? Definitely a positive. There's now greater physical access for disabled with mobility and vision-related issues. You see the braille everywhere, the ramps everywhere, elevators, all great things. Wheelchair ramps and curb cuts are really the norm for roads and public buildings, for sure. Legislation exists now to base these appeals. So if you feel like you've been discriminated against, and you look at the law, it doesn't seem like you were treated right, you have an avenue of pursuing in the courts to get that job, to get that accommodation. All good things. Some of the negatives, or maybe not so positive things, when these cases are taken to court, this is where a lot of people are confused. Try to get this clear in your head. When somebody that's disabled feels like they can do a job, and their employer says, no, I don't think you can do the job. It's going to be too much of a burden on our business. And you say, I disagree, and you hire a lawyer and you go to court, assuming you can afford a lawyer, but you go to court. In the overwhelming majority of cases, when these appeals have been made, the jurisdiction, the juries, the judges side on the side of the employer, not the employee or not the disabled person. So in most overwhelming majority of cases, the disabled lose in court. They don't win in court. Why is that? Not sure. Maybe they can't afford the same degree of lawyer. Maybe the law is biased against them. But they're usually, when they try to appeal, they're usually losing. The number of disabled receiving disability-related Social Security. If you go on disability, you get Social Security. So that's, I think about that bell curve, flattening the bell curve. I think a big part of the law is like, okay, let's get these disabled folks back to work It'll reduce the burden on the government and on everybody. We won't have to pay so much disability. We won't have to pay so much Social Security because less people on disability. Actually, the opposite has happened. It's more than doubled since the ADA. So this law of protections doesn't seem to help disabled people, or for who knows what the reason. A very complicated kind of issue, but it's more than doubled. So it's increasing. This is dated stuff to cost of more than 800 billion to taxpayers. So the burden on the system is just exploding with the disabled community. The unemployment rate and comparative salaries have not substantially changed since the advent of the ADA. So we have a little chart here. We go back to 2007, ADA, it's been going for 17 years, it was revised. Let's compare that to 2019. We can do 2020, we get into the COVID numbers, that's kind of distorted. But if we compare 2017 to 2019, the unemployment rate for the disabled in 2007 was 7.4%. The unemployment rate for the disabled in 2019 is 7.3%. Really hasn't changed much at all. ADA really hasn't had an impact. You can look at that, at least in terms of that rate, at all. The number of people who were not disabled, the able-bodied, their rate of unemployment is 5%, was around the time when ADA was really fully integrated. Now, at least in 2019, the economy was doing really well at that point before COVID. It was 3.7%. So ADA were doing better, disabled about the same. In fact, 2019 it was about half. You were twice as likely to be unemployed if you were disabled versus able-bodied. Gaps in salaries, what the disabled are paid versus what the able-bodied are paid. Back in 2007, there was a 20% gap. So the disabled made 20% less than the able-bodied. Scooting ahead 12 years with ADA, the gap has grown. The gap in salaries between the disabled and able-bodied is now 37%. i.e. the disabled made 30% less than the able-bodied. So there's been like a 17% jump in this gap between the able and the disabled body and the disabled. So in that sense, ADA has not been so successful. And kind of breaking down this idea of work. Why is that? Why is it still not seem to be effective in terms of getting the disabled back into the workforce, getting them salaries they deserve that are comparable to the able-bodied? Legislation, there's been a lot of legislation around work on disabled, Social Security and disabled insurance, ticket to work incentives, a myriad of other state and federal programs, maintenance programs, and they're evolving and changing all the time. Each state is kind of unique, but they all have certain characteristics that seem to be very similar. Very little to no health insurance. Provides limited back to work training. You just assume you just have to go back to work, even though you have to kind of be trained and think like an OT thinks to kind of adapt to the workforce. And in a lot of cases, there's like a disincentive to work. Talk about an example about that in a sense. And the big thing is the loss of insurance, the health insurance, losing Medicaid, losing Medicare, because you make too much money. And if you don't have insurance, you can't get the help you need to function and to work. So it's like, okay, I can't take this job because I'll lose my PCAs, my personal care assistants. And if I don't have them, I'm going to have to go to the nursing home kind of thing. So in a sense, there's a disincentive to work. Opportunities, reasons for change. Some limitations of the law. Again, we talked about that disqualifying for health insurance. If you work too much, limited support resources returning to work. Training, education, insurance, daycare is a big thing. Legislature's emphasis is on program qualification versus really employment. Third thing is this employer myth over the cost of accommodating for a disabled employer. A lot of people, remember I was in management, there was like this paranoia in human resources around the ADA and disabled. But in actuality, if you hire somebody who's disabled, it actually is beneficial overall to your company and your business versus the opposite. One study found for every dollar invested in disabled, realized a $50 benefit in benefits. So invest one in disabled, you get $50 back. Why is that? Think of this way: it gives you more of a diverse workforce, more diverse access to services and goods. A huge part of the population are disabled, especially as folks are aging more and more with the baby boomers. There's a huge geriatric population. A lot of them are disabled. Um, People are living longer with disabilities. You can tap into that market. It just makes your business so much more profitable. Reduce taxation burden for the disabled. Um, it really costs, generally speaking, it really costs very, very little to accommodate most workers. Here's the case example. I talked about kind of this idea of getting locked into poverty. This college student, Ann Landry, she was attending Georgetown. She had PCAs, which are personal care assistants. She was wheelchair bound, cerebral palsy, a lifelong kind of thing. She wants to be a lawyer. She's going to Georgetown. She has an undergraduate degree, very ambitious. She needs these PCAs through her Medicaid to give her that daily assist. She can't function without them. They turn her over in bed, help her with toileting, changing, getting dressed, all these essential things that she needs them for. Without them, she can't live on her own in an apartment. She would have to live in a nursing home, which obviously would be a lot more expensive to the system. She has to make less than $10,000 a year at this point when this article was done to keep her PCAs. If she makes more, she'll lose them, and she'll have to live in a nursing home. She can't function without them. So she was going to Georgetown, wanted to be a lawyer at the summer internship, which is a big deal and if you're in law school, but she couldn't take the job because she would lose her benefits, or she couldn't take the pay from the job because she would lose her benefits. And she said when she did this and she posted this, she got all these similar stories from lawyers, people pursuing MBAs, this disincentive to work until they get to the point where they can work and pay for everything. People don't quite understand how backwards and unjust the labor regulations can be. Every time I talk to someone who isn't in the disabled community, they're like, "You're kidding me! That can't be how it is. That can't be the law. There must be a way to fix it." So it's kind of very flawed, the laws, in terms of limiting. In some cases, definitely not all cases, definitely in her case. More ideas and solutions. This idea of the curb cuts. They talked about that briefly in the Crip Camp documentary, but there was this movement, again, part of the disabled movement, where these guys in wheelchairs of Berkeley started putting in these curb cuts. They used cement to make their own curb cuts. They were so upset with the city that they wouldn't, do curb cuts, and they pushed this and pushed this, and now it's the norm. You don't even realize that you've kind of grown up with it. This is the curb cut. See, it's not like this. They flat it out so you can just walk across. And obviously, it's ideal for something on wheels, a wheelchair or whatever. But it's also ideal for other folks, strollers, pushing carts, skateboards, luggage, elderly, walking, jogging. It's the way life is. It's kind of opened up this whole world for everybody. It acts as a kind of a force multiplier. Support of one group helped other groups. There's other examples of this, but this is a good example of this. Another example I talked about earlier is putting the wheelchair into your business, making it accessible for the people with wheelchairs or blind. You can open up your market, people to sell more stuff to more folks, make more money. It's kind of a win-win kind of thing. Okay, the reel, that's going to be an activity we do. Talking about Stella and disability porn. Crip Camp. Getting back to the questions, kind of answered all those. They're in the PowerPoints, and then what's coming up? We have the lab on Thursday. Look at the toolkit to get ready for that lab stuff we're going to be doing.